Do you want to know what the BlackRock conspiracy theory is really all about? And am I secretly actually an anti-Semitic bigot? Because this guy does. Ernie's a freelance journalist, and he hit me up with a few questions. And once I typed out my responses, I couldn't help but think, man, you guys gotta hear this. So you ready to learn the truth about the BlackRock conspiracy theory? Apparently some dude used my video to make some anti-Semitic claims on Twitter, and Elon Musk got involved, which is weird. So let's start there. I'm gonna more or less read just what I wrote to Ernie, but I'll skip a few things for time. Hi Ernie, thanks for getting in touch here. First, let's start by saying that I have no prior knowledge of who Benjamin Goggin is, and I do not agree with any of the takes he's attached to my content. His views are his own, and I think it's apparent to all of us what kind of guy he is. As a content creator, I know that my work will often be taken out of context, my words will be misrepresented by people with agendas, probably on both sides of the aisle, and that's generally the nature of the internet these days. Furthermore, I have seen no evidence of any Jewish conspiracies and have not once mentioned anyone's religion in my work, be that Christians, Jews, Muslims, or whatever, because I do not believe that the actions of some Jewish people represent the entirety of Jewish people, in exactly the same way that the actions of some white people or some black people do not represent the actions or beliefs of their entire races, respectively. This truth seems self-evident to me, yet our world is still so full of people who would divide us into identity groups and try to make racist or generalized remarks about arbitrary groupings of people that are, in fact, usually just a collective of individuals making individual choices. And lastly, I have no fucking idea what Elon is doing in that thread. Whatever, man. So I hope that clears that up. Secondly, and the much more interesting part of your inquiry, is probing into the thesis of my content and this conspiracy theory that BlackRock owns everything. So let's start this off by saying my opinion is my own, it's based off of my own research, and I am very much not infallible, nor do I claim to be. I simply try my best to sift through sources to find accurate information and let it do the talking. TikTok has a sources problem due to its format and algorithmic tendencies, so I try my best to show my sources with every claim or concept that I speak to. So let's address this argument, which is the most common critique of my content that pertains to BlackRock, or Vanguard, or whoever. As quoted directly from the Reuters article that you linked, a video claiming BlackRock and Vanguard own all the biggest corporations in the world is missing context. While it is true that both investment firms hold significant shares in many of the world's leading companies and can therefore wield voting rights, shares are ultimately owned by BlackRock and Vanguard's clients. Thanks for the good journalism, Reuters. Ironically, this venerable and trusted news source actually fails to link credible sources for most of their claims other than quoting representatives of BlackRock making non-legally binding assertions. However, I've made videos citing actual sources, i.e. the SEC, showing how and why Reuters is being extremely misleading in this claim. I've explained on this channel before that a Form 13F is the form required to be filed by giant investment managers to show the things that they own. This is sourced directly from the SEC, by the way. And that when you go to BlackRock's 13F filings, you'll see that they very much own these shares. And if you look up here, notice investment discretion, sole. I mean, we didn't really need a source to tell us this, but... Then notice how the column for the number of shares they own and the column for the number of shares that they have the voting authority over are exactly the same? You can quite easily see that all of these shares are listed on their books. Furthermore, if you were to open a Robinhood or a Fidelity account and purchase shares of a common ETF like SPY, your account would show beneficial ownership of a share of SPY, which is an ETF product. Your account would not show you 504 fractional shares of all of the products that SPY is composed of. Sure, we can argue semantics. This Reuters article tried to use very clever wording to make it seem as though being the one providing the capital also transfers ownership. Quoted, however, spokespeople for both firms told Reuters that while they do appear to own significant shares in the world's biggest businesses, those shares are purchased using money belonging to their clients, and therefore the shareholders are ultimately their clients, pretty much. This is in fact pretty misleading. If you take out a loan and buy a car, would you say that JP Morgan owns your car? Well, you could say that, but then you'd be straying awfully close to conspiracy theories. Or if a business took out a loan to furnish its new warehouses with inventory, would you walk into that business and say that the products on those shelves is owned by Wells Fargo? So if we take this criticism literally, I have so far not had any person provide me with evidence to the contrary of what I've just presented to you. I'm fully open to being wrong about this, but every counter debate I've heard thus far is some version of, well, they're using our money, so it's really our shares. And this is where we arrive at the fact that that's not even the point. Everything I've just addressed is actually just a straw man argument distracting us from the actual issue, which I'm trying to highlight with my content, which is not money, but power and influence, mostly wielded through share voting rights. God damn, this hair is getting annoying. It's quite easy to verify, and the Reuters article correctly states that in almost all cases, BlackRock or Vanguard or whoever is actually voting these shares for us. And sure, that makes sense because we don't have time to research all these hundreds of companies that are in our ETFs and our indexes and vote on all the different executives that are up for election and bullshit. It's just not realistically feasible for your average person to do that. And thus we wind up with the fund managers at firms like BlackRock wielding outsized amount of voting power all over the biggest corporations of America. Now let's be clear. This does not mean that BlackRock or Vanguard literally own said companies. It simply means that they are likely to have the most say in who sits on the board, who's hired for executive roles, and what the overall strategy of the company is. And when you hold similar power over, shall we say, all competing companies within a marketplace, like every cereal brand or pharmaceutical companies, that's where I start to have questions. When you zoom out even further and realize that they even have this amount of influence over competing or codependent industries, such as both traditional energy and renewable energy corporations, or in corporations producing the majority of food in America, as well as the corporations supplying the ingredients for that food, as well as the corporations profiting off the incredibly poor health outcomes, all of that trash food and agricultural chemicals use, all that trash food and agricultural chemical use gives rise to, that's where I start to have questions. Now, I'm not saying that Larry Fink is in some lair scheming how he can poison the people and profit off their demise. Not at all. What I'm saying is that when the largest shareholders in every public company are financial behemoths and profit and power are the only motivators, we will inevitably wind up with board members and executives who will do anything to maximize shareholder value, even at the expense of health and human betterment. Organic sugar is great, but corn syrup is cheaper. Offering life-saving and essential medication for 2 times the cost seems like enough profit. But why not monopolize patents and competition and sell the same drug for 100 times the profit? The effects of large-scale monocropping are devastating to the environment, but they're great for profits at fertilizer companies. When no one at the tables of any of the largest corporations in America represent anything even remotely resembling the interests of average people like you and me, and instead represent the interests of the ultra-wealthy, it's no mystery how we wind up living in a corporate hell world where we are all getting sicker, more depressed, more divided, and the vast majority of us are getting poorer while a very small slice are getting way richer. Now, based upon my research of your journalism, Ernie, I understand the subtext of your very thinly veiled attempt at approaching me as a neutral journalist who wants to report an unbiased piece about the state of our world. I know that you're already formulating a thesis in your mind about how to smear those conspiracy theorists and carefully select pieces of what I say to fit your narrative. But I would ask you, are these the people that you want to defend? The military-industrial complex, lobbying for and profiting off of endless war? Global agricultural corporations that are destroying our forests, making our farmland barren, and spraying poison on our food crops for profit? Pharmaceutical companies that have well-proven track record of terrible ethics violations, human rights abuses, and profiteering off the backs of people they claim to care for? You are a skilled journalist with a sharp mind, and as far as I can tell, most of your reporting to date has ignored this glaring problem in our world. Indeed, the problem in our world. I know your mind is probably already made up on how you're going to write this article. That's fine. You do you, Ernie. But I would be honored to have another sharp mind like your own turn their eyes towards the blatant problem that big money poses. And the biggest problem of all, and the true goal of my content, is that this problem is anything but simple, anything but a BlackRock conspiracy theory. In order to meaningfully address and understand this problem, there's nuance and complexity. We are talking about a societal disease arising from the meeting place of human nature and global commerce, 2 of the most complex systems in the known universe. And how can we even begin to address this problem if no one has even a basic understanding of finance and money and how all these things work? So many of us are undereducated, yet overstimulated, underpaid, yet overworked, undernourished, and yet overfed, underappreciated, and overconnected. No one has time to even pay attention to the problem because we're all just trying to tread water and not sink beneath all of our mounting debt into abject poverty, homelessness, and worse. If you want a conspiracy theory, there it is. For 100 years and more now, the banks, the Fed owned by the banks, and the ultra-wealthy they serve and are served by have been profiting off of all angles of the common people's suffering. And it's up to people like you and me, Ernie, to do something about it. Or you could write another hit piece for a couple $100 about how Larry Fink is a great guy and those conspiracy theorists online are just anti-Semitic. It's your choice.